I spent 15 years building this city, but on Sunday mornings, I only cared about the back door of my own house. The city's skyline was a jagged masterpiece of glass and steel, a skyline I helped design when my back was strong and my eyes were sharp. I remember the smell of hot rivets and the way the wind would howl through the skeletal frames of skyscrapers, 50 stories up, where a single misstep meant a long fall into nothing. Back then, I wasn't an incapable old man. I was an architect of reality, but that life was gone. Now, at 64, my world had shrunk to the size of a suburban lot. I was kneeling on the cold, damp mud of the patio, my old knees popping like dry twigs. I was working a drop of oil into a stubborn brass hinge that had been squeaking since Thursday. It was a small task, a trivial fix, but in my world, everything had to be structurally sound. Precision was the only way I knew how to show love. The smell of 3-in-1 oil and wet concrete hit my nostrils, a scent that usually brought me peace. It was the smell of a man being useful. I didn't know then that while I was fixing the door to my home, a plan was already in motion to lock me out of it forever. I was reinforcing the foundation of a house that was about to be burned down from the inside. The puppy's monitor buzzed in my pocket. It was a small plastic device I'd set up in the kitchen so we could keep an eye on the new golden retriever Elena had insisted we get. I didn't look up at first. I just assumed the dog was tripping the motion sensor again, probably knocking over its water bowl. I wiped a smudge of grease onto my thigh, my thumb searching for the next screw to tighten. Then, Elena's voice came through the speaker. It wasn't the voice she used with me, the soft, patronizing tone she employed when she thought I was drifting. This was sharp, clinical, and dead as a winter morning. She was talking to Leo, her son, my stepson, the boy I'd raised since he was 6 years old. "He's not your father, Leo," she whispered. The audio echoed slightly off the kitchen tiles, making the words sound hollower, more ominous. "Don't let the sentimentality cloud your judgment. He's just the account that never runs dry. He's served his purpose, honey. Now, we let the old man rest while we take what's ours." I froze. I was still on my knees, in the mud, the screwdriver gripped so hard. The plastic handle began to groan against my calloused palm. A pulse thudded in my thumb like a frantic, trapped bird. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like they were made of the same wet concrete I used to pour in the shipyards. Heavy, cold, and sinking. I almost fell, my knuckles scraping against the brickwork. I listened as the clink of a wine glass hit the granite countertop. The countertop I'd paid off 3 years early, with a bonus from the bridge project. Elena continued, her voice fluttering with a fake, practiced concern. "The psychiatrist needs a history of lapses, Leo. Just mention the time he forgot the oven was on. Make it sound like you're scared for his safety. If we get the power of attorney triggered by Monday, Jules becomes our ward. He becomes a line item on our balance sheet." I waited for Leo to defend me. I waited for him to mention the shipyard shifts. I worked to pay for his private hockey coaches. I waited for him to remember the nights I stayed up, helping him with his geometry. Or the time I sold my father's gold watch to cover his first semester at Columbia. Instead, there was a long, heavy silence. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the background, a refrigerator I'd fixed just last month. Then came Leo's reply. It was quiet, resigned, and utterly cold. "Okay, Mom. I'm just tired of pretending. I want to be done with him." The screwdriver slipped from my hand and clattered against the stone. For 3 seconds, I was just a broken old man in the mud. Realized that the people I had spent 15 years shielding were the ones lighting the match. My heart didn't break. It just felt like a structural failure, a load-bearing wall, giving way under a weight it was never designed to carry. I didn't rush into the kitchen. My DNA wouldn't let me. I was an engineer. We don't react, we analyze. I stood up slowly, wiping the dirt from my trousers with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a 1964 Gold Omega, the exact model my father had lost in the shipyards 40 years ago. I had spent 6 months scouring auction sites, and 3 months of my secret savings to find it. It was meant to be Leo's 21st birthday gift. It wasn't just a watch. It was a piece of my soul I was handing over, a way to tell the boy that he was finally the man I had tried to be. I looked at the watch. its gold face reflecting the gray morning sky. And then I looked at Leo's Mercedes in the driveway, a car I'd bought him because he needed it for his internship. I realized then that I was the one who had taught them to treat me this way. I'd over-provisioned until I'd made myself obsolete. I'd reinforced their lives so much that they didn't see the man anymore. They only saw the support beams. And they were ready to dismantle those beams and sell them for scrap. I walked into the house through the mudroom, moving like a ghost. I could hear them laughing in the kitchen now, the heavy conversation over, replaced by the mundane sounds of a Sunday brunch. I stood in the hallway, 3 feet away from the woman who was planning to commit me to an institution, and I watched her. Elena didn't even look up. She didn't move her coffee mug when I reached past her for a glass of water. To her, I was already gone. I was just a signature on a deed, a ghost haunting a house that she had already claimed. I stood there, replacing the gasket in the sink that I'd noticed was leaking earlier that morning. My hands were steady, but inside, I was already drafting the demolition plans. If they wanted a man who was losing his mind, I would give them a performance they'd never forget. But if they thought they could seize the estate of Julian Vane, they had forgotten one thing. I built this world, and I knew exactly which bolt to pull to make it all come crashing down on their heads. I didn't go to sleep that night. While Elena and Leo slept the peaceful sleep of the entitled, I retreated to my sanctuary, the workshop. I sat on my stool until the shop went dark, the shadows of my hanging tools stretching like jagged fingers across the floor. My legs felt heavy, like they were made of the same wet concrete I used to pour in the shipyard, cold, immobile, and sinking. I looked at the gold Omega watch on the bench, and for a split second, I considered just leaving it there. I considered letting them win. But then, the furnace kicked on. The low, mechanical groan vibrated through the soles of my boots, a familiar rhythm that woke the engineer inside me. I looked at the legal papers Elena had left in the kitchen, the draft that called me incapable. Maybe I had been incapable of seeing that love shouldn't require a blueprint, but I was damn sure capable of reading a structural failure when I saw one. I closed my eyes and leaned my forehead against the cold metal of my vise. When I opened them, the defeat was gone. It was replaced by a cold, clinical precision. I pulled my old laptop from the cabinet. It was a rugged, industrial machine I used for structural calculations, filled with software that could predict the collapse of a bridge or the tension of a suspension cable. But tonight, I wasn't measuring steel. I was measuring souls. My fingers, thick and calloused from a lifetime of manual labor, felt like lead weights on the sleek, shallow keys of our home's high-speed router interface. I began digging into the network logs. I knew Leo was struggling with his final year at Columbia. I knew he spent more time at the country club than the library. It took me less than an hour to find what I was looking for. His browser history was littered with visits to Scholar Shield, a high-end ghostwriting service. I fumbled with the modern UI, my eyes straining under the fluorescent light. I accidentally clicked a notify support button, and for a second, a cold spike of panic hit my chest. If an alert went to Leo's phone, the game was over before it started. I sat frozen, held my breath, and listened to the silence of the house. Nothing, no footsteps, no pings. I was still a ghost in their world, and ghosts are hard to catch. I finally breached the account. I found the order history. A dozen papers over 2 years, all paid for with my emergency retirement fund. Elena hadn't just been stealing my autonomy, she'd been using my sweat to buy her son's intellect. I opened the current project, his senior thesis for an ethics course titled The Moral Obligations of Legacy. The irony tasted like copper in the back of my throat. I read the ghostwriter's draft. It was hollow. A string of buzzwords about family values and societal debt cut and pasted from the internet. It was a C- paper at best. I didn't expose him. I did something much worse. I hijacked the project. I messaged the ghostwriter from Leo's account, told them the client was taking over the final revisions, and I began to write. I poured every bit of my engineering precision, every ounce of my betrayal, and every secret truth about our family into that paper. I used the jargon of my bridge building days, terms like tensile strength, shear stress, and unseen burdens, weaving them into a masterpiece of ethical philosophy. that no 21-year-old could possibly produce on his own. By 3 a.m., I had become the architect of Leo's mind. I was writing a thesis so brilliant, so complex, that it would become a noose. I was effectively poisoning his future to save my own. As I hit save, I knew I wasn't just writing a paper. I was building a cage. The pressure changed from a slow leak to a burst pipe on Friday morning. I was in the kitchen, staring at a loose tile I'd meant to regrout, when Elena walked in. She was carrying a designer briefcase I'd never seen before, probably bought with the same fund that paid for Leo's essays. "The hearing is moved up, Jules," she said. Her voice was airy, almost cheerful, like she was announcing a holiday. "Monday morning at 9. The doctor says the sooner we get you into a supported environment, the better." She didn't look at me. She was too busy checking her reflection in the polished chrome of the toaster. I'd spent all night fixing. I felt the familiar urge to reach out and straighten her collar, to be the provider, one last time. My messiah complex was screaming at me to save her from herself. But I forced my hands into my pockets. I had 72 hours. The biggest obstacle wasn't the law. It was the boy. Leo came into the shop that afternoon, looking for his car keys. The late afternoon sun hit his face, and for a second he looked so much like the 6-year-old I'd taught to ride a bike that my throat tightened. I found myself reaching out to adjust his tie for his pre-hearing interview, my fingers trembling with a decade of habit. "You've got a big day, Leo," I whispered. He pulled away, his eyes cold and filled with a strange kind of disgust. "Don't touch me, Jules. You're making me nervous. Just stay in here where you belong." That was the moment the last of my guilt evaporated. The boy I had raised had been replaced by a stranger who saw me as a faulty component. I didn't say another word. I just watched him walk out. The gold Omega watch, still sitting on my bench like a silent witness. I returned to my laptop. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to cut the power to the entire structure. I spent the rest of the night refining the thesis, making it so perfect that it would be undeniable and inescapable. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, smelling of lemon polish and old paper. It was a sterile wood-paneled box designed to dismantle lives with quiet efficiency. Elena sat at the petitioner's table, looking radiant in a dark navy suit, her face a perfect portrait of tragic concern. She looked like a woman grieving a living husband. Across the aisle, I sat alone at the respondent's desk, slumped slightly, playing the role of the foundation they thought was crumbling. I felt a phantom itch in my right palm, the ghost of the screwdriver I'd been using for 40 years. My thumb kept searching for the grip, but there was only empty air. Across the room, Leo wouldn't look at me. He was too busy adjusting his silk tie, the one I'd tried to fix for him 48 hours ago. The high-pitched whistle of a nearby hearing aid and the rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's keys were the only sounds in the room. The pressure was at its peak. Elena's lawyer spoke first, a sharp man with a voice like a paper cut. He presented the evidence of my decline, the missed bills I'd intentionally left unpaid, the erratic hours I spent in the workshop, and the medical reports Elena had carefully curated by feeding lies to our family doctor. He spoke about me as if I were a leaking roof or a cracked beam, something that needed to be managed for the safety of the inhabitants. When it was my turn, I didn't defend my sanity. I didn't argue about the bills or the doctor's notes. I simply stood up, my knees surprisingly steady, and handed the judge a single bound document. "This is my son's senior thesis, Your Honor," I said. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of the steel I used to hoist in the shipyard. It was submitted to the university's ethics department at midnight. I believe it demonstrates exactly who has been managing the intellect and the moral compass of this family. The judge adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. The courtroom went dead silent. It was a masterpiece of moral philosophy, filled with complex engineering metaphors about structural integrity and the unseen burdens of the provider. As the judge reached the section on the moral debt of the beneficiary, I watched Elena's face. The color didn't just drain, it curdled. She realized, in a single terrifying instant, that every brilliant word her son had claimed as his own was actually mine. I hadn't just written the paper. I had signed the metadata of the digital file, with my professional engineer's seal. I had left a digital footprint so deep that no lawyer could erase it. Mr. Vane, the judge said, looking over his spectacles, with a look of profound realization. If you are as incapacitated as this petition claims, then your son has committed massive academic fraud by submitting a paper written by a man who cannot think for himself. However, if you are fit, as this brilliant writing suggests, then this entire petition is a malicious lie. The room fell into a silence so deep I could hear the court reporters breathing. I looked at Leo. His head was bowed so low, I thought his neck might snap. His Ivy League future was dissolving in the judge's hands, turned into ashes by the very man he wanted to be done with. I had won the case. The petition was dismissed with prejudice, but the victory felt like a slab of cold marble pressing against my chest. The house was a tomb when I returned that evening. The hum of the refrigerator was the only thing left of the life I'd built. Elena's things were gone, just a few empty hangers, clicking together in the closet like skeletal fingers. She'd left without a word, her reputation in the suburbs scorched by the court transcript. I went into the bathroom and gripped the porcelain sink, staring at my reflection until the man in the glass looked like a stranger. I'd spent 15 years holding up the roof, and now, finally, the weight was gone. But the house was empty. I found Leo in the hallway, his suitcase packed, standing by the door I'd painted 3 summers ago. He didn't look like a betrayer. He just looked erased. I reached out to say something, to tell him I was sorry it had to be this way. But the words died in my throat. He looked at me with a fear that cut deeper than Elena's hatred. I never built anything of my own, he whispered, his voice cracking. Not my success, and not even my hatred for you. It was all your script. He walked out, and the sound of the deadbolt clicking home felt like a final, permanent structural failure. I drove back to the shipyard pier where it all began. The sun was dipping behind the cranes, casting long orange shadows across the rusted iron. I pulled my father's gold Omega from my pocket and wound it. Click, click, click. My hands were stable, free of the grease and the guilt. I'd won my life back, but I'd lost the only boy I ever called a son. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't have to be useful to anyone. And maybe that's why this victory felt like the most expensive thing I'd ever bought. It was the most lonely I'd ever felt.